Good afternoon to all of you, as well, the folks in the balcony and the folks that are watching us on live stream. Welcome to our 7th annual Menus of Change Leadership Summit, a joint initiative of the Culinary Institute of America and the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, Department of Nutrition. I'm Greg Drescher. I'm Vice President of Industry Leadership and Strategic Initiatives for the Culinary Institute of America. How many of you have been with us for a previous Menus of Change conference? Great, and I think that, we've seen what a wonderful community this has been, where we've all been able to come together and be inspired by the work of this whole community. So welcome back to those of you that have been with us before, and for those of you joining for the first time, I think you're in for a real treat and a real solid conference. 7 years ago, we launched our Menus of Change initiative, recognizing the need for our industry, the $800 billion food service industry, to have integrated, let's see, little assist on the slides there. Sorry. We need, somebody needs to help there on the advance. Sorry, 7 years ago, we launched our Menus of Change initiative, recognizing the need for our industry, the $800 billion food service sector, to have access to integrated evidence-based guidance around sustainability, food ethics, nutrition, and chronic disease prevention at the intersection of business innovation and culinary insight. And as you can see in this Venn diagram, the different elements that we're trying to pull together. All of those things then at the intersection of business innovation and culinary insight, which gets you to this next slide. And my clicker doesn't seem to be working here. So if you can have next slide. And then you can see, you can imagine any number of scenarios for healthy, sustainable, delicious food where you can't build a business model, right? And so that's the last of the Venn diagrams, which gets us to the notion of guidance for our industry. For each of the last 7 years, in addition to staging this conference, we have gathered top experts to inform the development and release of our Menus of Change annual report on the present state of our diets and food systems, and to help chart the future of our work together. This week, we have released our 2019 Menus of Change annual report, next slide, which we will discuss throughout this conference. Both the executive summary of the report as well as the full 59-page report are available through our Menus of Change app, which hopefully you've all downloaded, or the Menus of Change website. Our 24 principles of healthy, sustainable menus, next slide please, have driven significant innovation across our industry, next slide, and our annual dashboard, which, next slide, tells us where we are getting in terms of traction with change and where we need to redouble our focus. Now, the good news overall is that chefs, food service leaders, and all of you in this room are stepping up and helping to chart new, healthier, and more sustainable directions for our industry. A quick look at some of the recent accomplishments of Menus of Change, again made possible by many of you at this conference, also speak to tremendous forward progress. Two of our sector-specific leadership collaboratives, the CIA Stanford University Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, with its nearly 60-member college and universities, and our Healthy Menus R&D Collaborative, met in advance of this conference to chart their strategies for change over the next few years, building on the considerable impact that their work has already had. Our Healthy Kids Collaborative, which brings together K through 12 school nutrition leaders, is working aggressively to bring more plant-rich options to our nation's schools. Our protein flip concept has resonated with industry leaders and is as an example of the power of culinary strategy. Next slide. Witness the widespread industry adoption of the blended burger, developed by our own CIA Healthy Menus R&D Collaborative in collaboration with Mushroom Council. There we go. Culinary strategy and our blended burger. Taking about 30% of the beef out of millions of hamburgers every year. And I want to give a shout out to our good friend Lisa Feldman, who's the culinary director at Sodexo and co-chair of our Healthy Kids Collaborative, and her Sodexo colleague Rob Marasco, whose collective leadership in the K through 12 university and healthcare space is responsible for a good chunk of those numbers. By their count, for those of you that have been tracking the progress of the blend, 3.8 million blended burgers served this year in just their K through 12 segment alone. So take 30% of the beef out of that and you get the results. Over the past 2 years, the CI has led with the concept of plant forward, widening the framework around the protein shift imperative to include, yes, vegetarian and vegan, but also flexitarian approaches for omnivores, which will likely engage the greatest number of people. The framing of plant forward is increasingly being adopted by the industry. We've tried to move people off a conversation of plant-based only to the larger tent, the larger concept of plant forward. Now, to illustrate who is leading in this space around the world, we teamed up with the EAT Foundation out of Europe to curate the Plant Forward Global 50, which you see here. And if you haven't checked this out, it's at plantforward50.com. It's a who's who of high visibility independent restaurant chefs who are demonstrating what's possible in this space. And in May, and this is one of the chefs, Jose Andres, was one of the 50. Great coverage by the Washington Post when we launched this. And then to look at a different part of the industry, we partnered with QSR Magazine and in May released the QSR CI Plant Forward Fast Casual Watch List. And collectively this provides a comprehensive look at the amazing depth and breadth of innovation already underway in just the fast casual segment of our industry. And QSR editor Sam Ochis will be leading a session here at the conference to further highlight this work. If you want to look at the article in advance, you can go to the website, QSR website, and download the article. It's really impressive what's going on in the fast casual sector. Also in May, let's see, we're stuck again here. Next slide, please. In May, we launched our Napa Valley, at our Napa Valley Copia campus. How many of you have been to one of our Napa Valley campuses? All right, great. This is our Copia campus. We launched an annual companion conference to Menus of Change, which we're calling the Global Plant Forward Culinary Summit, and I know some of you were there for that conference. And that brought together chefs from Asia, Latin America, the Mediterranean, Africa, and across the United States to inspire us with insights from traditional plant-forward cultures as well as from the front lines of culinary innovation. And you can learn more about that at our new plantforwardkitchen.org website. In our degree programs here at the CI, Plant Forward is driving thinking, fresh thinking from our bachelor's degree in applied food studies to our master's degree in food business, and from the expansion of our gardens to our purchasing programs here at the college. We are especially excited about the newest collaboration with the food team at Google. This, by the way, is the Plant Forward Culinary Summit. Let's just advance. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. We're especially excited about our newest collaboration with the food team at Google, assisting the CI in developing a groundbreaking plant-forward culinary arts certification initiative with 3 levels of training and testing, a new plant-forward video online library, and a 2.0 approach to mentorship and apprenticeship within a context of organizational transformation. Following an initial rollout within the food team at Google's global workforce, watch for a wider industry launch of this in late 2020. Now, all of this movement, this progress, tells us, there's a slide of, for those of you that were here a few years ago, John Fraser from Nick's spoke to us, and that's one of the plates of his food at that fabulous restaurant in New York. All of this movement, this progress, tells us there is a wellspring of creativity and dynamism within the food service sector to bring a solutions approach to the many challenges facing us with respect to environmental and health impacts of our current food choices, as well as the rapidly changing preferences and values of our customers, especially our youngest customers, millennials and Gen Z. But if real change is underway, we have to ask ourselves, is it enough? How do we need to scale our efforts, and towards what future goals? And by when? Earlier this year, the EAT Foundation teamed up with the prestigious British medical journal TheLancet to publish a peer-reviewed report, the work of 30 commissioners and other technical experts from around the world following 3 years' worth of research, review, modeling, and synthesis to exactly address those questions. The report presents for the first time evidence-based numerical targets from the scientific community for food consumption to keep our food systems within safe operating planetary boundaries, supplying optimal nutrition and anticipating a global population of 10 billion people on the planet in just 30 years in 2050. As one of our areas of focus for this year's conference, we are going to hear more about the EAT-Lancet Report, its approach and findings, and then have some good discussion about what this might mean for the future of restaurants and food service menu R&D. Yes, as you'll hear, the targets are aggressive. If you haven't read the report, they're very aggressive. And they call on us to bend the curve of unsustainable practices in the short term with more time to achieve these end targets in the coming years. And for any sort of natural skeptics in the room, I would encourage you for the moment to suspend the instinct to say, let's not recommend something that seems unreasonable or unattainable, a perfectly reasonable reaction to the report, and be open to at least hearing the evidence for these recommendations. In terms of a shift from animal protein-centric diets to plant-forward diets, as we may well hear Dr. Willett from Harvard talk to us about in a few minutes, for many countries, including the United States and much of Europe, thinking about the change that we need to make, we're not talking about practices that the world has never seen before. In fact, as recently as the early 1960s, much of the Mediterranean region paralleled this planetary healthy diet. And a number of other traditional food cultures exhibit this same traditional plant-to-animal food balance today. In any event, whatever the endpoints of change we think we need to meet, and we can reasonably debate these, we are so far from even a meaningful midpoint or early point of progress that we need to accelerate the work that is already underway, the success of which has the potential to build on itself. And I think you may have read, there's a fabulous report on plant protein in the Forbes that was released today. You should be all sure to check out. And you're seeing this commentary arriving now. Has anyone missed, for example, the recent and unprecedented embrace of 100% based plant burger options by the major U.S. Restaurant chain? Who could have foreseen this even 5 years ago? And almost every article that's coming out now is accelerating faster than expected, right? So these things have a way of building on themselves, and you go, well, maybe some of this change is not as hard as we thought it would be. Finally, this note, as this food system change juggernaut continues to gather steam, many actors in the system will play leading roles, from scientists and entrepreneurs to food technologists and policymakers. But I believe, and I think most of you believe, that chefs have and will continue to have one of the most critical roles to play in all of this, which is why we always come back to this North Star insight. The unapologetic elevation of deliciousness is a global sustainability and public health imperative. Deliciousness is not just the domain of three-star chefs and expensive restaurants, and I really believe that the widespread achievement of healthy, sustainable, plant-forward deliciousness will be a critical make-or-break factor in any global food system transformation. Now, beyond the pursuit of deliciousness, it's also good to remember that guidance for individuals is not the same as guidance for restaurants or even non-commercial food service. Yes, chefs can and will lead in this plant-forward transformation, but if you're a flexitarian following a plant-rich diet and you order a meat entree at your favorite restaurant because you're in a celebratory mood or the Korean barbecue just looked good on the menu, you're adding layers of nuance to the business of trend tracking around strategies for business change. Let's recognize that food service is a big, highly diversified industry serving all kinds of people for all kinds of meal occasions. Yes, everyone needs to do their part in this change process, but not every part needs to be the same. Before we get started with our general session, I would like to briefly thank a few folks for their role in this year's Menus of Change annual conference and report. Our Menus of Change Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee, headed up by Harvard nutrition professor Walter Willett. We are grateful to the entire nutrition department at Harvard for their energetic support of this and other CI Harvard leadership initiatives over the years. You'll hear from Dr. Willett shortly. Our Menus of Change Business Leadership Council, headed up by our chair, Michael Kaufman, CI Trustee Emeritus, partner with the Astor Group and visiting lecturer at Harvard Business School, and Vice Chair Siobhan Hansen, who heads up Nutrition and Food Choice Architecture globally for the food team at Google. I also want to acknowledge the talented and tireless leadership of Jackie Chi, who you will meet shortly if you haven't already, our interim program director for Menus of Change, most ably filling in for Sophie Egan, who is looking after her twin boys as she wraps up her maternity leave. And then finally, I want to, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Maybe we have to go back. Go back another 1, 2, there we go. Our Menus of Change sponsors, many who have been with us for 7 years, many of whom have been with us since we launched the Leadership Division more than 20 years ago, who have helped to incubate and grow this session, including our top-tier sponsors, Unilever Food Solutions, DEA, and Hinneman. And here are the other folks, the gold and bronze sponsors, and we very much appreciate your participation and support. One final, next slide, please. One final announcement. If you haven't been on our mobile app for the conference, I encourage you to download it now and take advantage of it. You can read all of the presenter bios there and lots of other good information about the conference. If you have questions on any of this, please see our hospitality team outside. So this year, our Menus of Change conference will look at a variety of critical issues, from the health of our oceans and fisheries to carbohydrate quality, biodiversity, food waste reduction, and a rich array of sessions and discussions around entrepreneurship and leading organizational change. But we are going to begin with the big picture: 2050, the science around planetary boundaries, and strategies to lift the global burden of chronic disease. So let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce Lena Gordon, who will lead off our first session. Lena is the director of the Stockholm Resilience Center in Sweden, which is an independent research center affiliated with the University of Stockholm, specializing in sustainable development and environmental issues, including climate change, land use, water resources, and food security. She's also a member of our Menus of Change Scientific Council. Please welcome Lena Gordon.
Thank you so much. So this first general session, we will look into the EAT-Lancet Commission, what it did and what it didn't do, and how it can be translated into delicious and actionable strategies. But before we kick off, I just wanted us to reflect on a few things about the planet that we live on today. First of all, did you know that if we took all the birds that exist on this planet, only 30% of them would be wild species? 70% of all the birds on this planet is for production purposes. If we took all the mammals on this planet, only 4% of all the mammals are wild species. Today, 36% constitutes of humans and 60% of our wild livestock. So as a human species, we really transformed this planet. It works fundamentally different today than what it used to work like just a couple of 100 years ago. And it's in this context of the Anthropocene, an era that is really dominated by us humans, that the EAT-Lancet report was done. So I will introduce the first speaker, and he's not here with us live, but he is virtually linking up from Germany. So it's Professor Johan Rockström. He is a director of the Potsdam Institute of Climate Change, or Climate Impact in Germany. He's also a professor of Earth System Science and Sustainability, both at Stockholm Resilience Center and the Potsdam University. And he's one of the most well-known and inspiring professors internationally on global sustainability issues. So we will hear him by video first. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. If we put the two, in my mind, most important scientific reports ever produced next to each other on a table, you see them here on the screen, the IPCC 1.5 degrees Celsius report, showing that we have to stay well below 2 degrees Celsius, aiming for 1.5 to avoid dangerous climate impacts in the future. And the second one, the IPBES, Global Assessment on Ecosystems and Biodiversity, showing that we're in the 6th mass extinction of species. Put these two together on the table, and we have the scientific justification for being in a planetary emergency. Now is the time to recognize that we need transformations to global sustainability across all sectors in society. Now, this is an emergency not only related to high risks of impact. It is an emergency because we have so much scientific evidence showing that we need to, for climate, bend the global curve of emissions no later than 2020, next year, and cut emissions by half over the next decade. This is a transformative journey that has to keep a pace that we've never seen before. Now, this is to avoid risks that could become irreversible. And in this slide, you see the latest science on the hothouse Earth trajectories showing that if we burn fossil fuels taking us 2 degrees Celsius warming, we may cross tipping points in the biophysical, nature-based systems across the planet that regulates the resilience and the ability of the planet to remain in a Holocene geological state that is the only state we know for certain can support humanity. The only way to secure that resilience in the Earth system is by staying within the safe operating space of planetary boundaries for land, water, biodiversity, nitrogen, phosphorus, and the climate system. All these factors that are so closely related to the food system. So that's why it was so important to get, for the first time, health scientists, sustainability scientists, and food system researchers together into the EAT-Lancet Commission, addressing for the first time the big question: can we scientifically and quantitatively define targets for healthy diets from sustainable food systems as it relates to a people-planet future in the era of the Anthropocene? Now, the problem is therefore vast and large in terms of both health and sustainability. We have all the dramatic data on the fact that we're in a pandemic trajectory on non-communicable diseases. We have almost 1 billion malnourished people. We also have equal numbers, roughly 2 billion, of obese and undernourished in developed and developing countries. Globally, 1 person in 3 are malnourished today, and 1 in 2 can be malnourished already by 2030 if we continue business as usual. But we also know that we're really stuck between a rock and a hard place for agriculture. The world's #1 cause behind greenhouse gas emissions, 24%, according to the latest IPCC assessment, but also the world's single largest consumer of fresh water, the prime driver of biodiversity loss, land use expansion, and eutrophication of freshwater systems. So here we have the challenge. Culprit #1, agriculture across the value chain, causing unhealth and planetary challenges that we now need to address simultaneously. So the question in the EAT-Lancet Commission was how to achieve dietary targets and planetary health for 10 billion people by 2050. We did this through mapping and synthesizing science across the health research, from controlled feeding studies, long-term cohort studies, randomized trials, to the Earth system science synthesis on planetary research. Now, that gave us scientific targets for healthy diets as a starting point, what we call the Planetary Health Diet. It was based on the framework integrating an Earth system approach, the Planetary Boundaries Framework, with a planetary health approach, taking the position that there are universal scientifically based frameworks for all human beings to have science-based health advice for food. Now, for the food side of this, we, not surprisingly, went through all the food groups in the average daily plate of consumption. For sustainability, not surprisingly, the planetary boundaries that are the most importantly associated with food, from climate change to land conversion and biodiversity loss. And this is the result in the Planetary Health Diet, showing a flexitarian diet with increasing plant-based protein, reduction in animal-based protein, quantifying quite carefully in ranges what would be defined from the best science we have a healthy planetary diet. It is a flexitarian diet, allowing for roughly 5 servings of animal-based protein per week, a very significant reduction in red meat from ruminant cattle, but still 2 servings of white meat, 2 servings of marine animal protein, and 1 serving of red meat. The 100 gram per person per week in red meat is roughly eating 1 hamburger per week instead of consuming 3-4 hamburgers per week as we do on average in the industrialized world today. A very large increase in vegetables, fruit, nuts, reduction in starchy-based vegetables, whole grains and unsaturated fats, and reduction in all sugars. So that's the flexitarian diet, the best planetary diet we can envisage from science. It looks roughly like this: half of the plate coming from plant-based proteins, the other half from the mix of animal-based and different sources of fat. This is how it looked like in the Northern Hemisphere culture, showing that it's not a vegetarian or vegan diet, but it's also a shift in diversity and increase in plant-based proteins. It also allows for a very high degree of diversity across different culinary cultures in the world, which is really important. These are scientific targets for a universal framework within which we can have high degree of diversity. In the world, we are outside of the planetary health diet shown here in the little circle, the 100% circle, on red meat and starchy vegetables. But if you look at, North America, even further outside of this healthy diet, adding unsustainable consumption levels on dairy, on white meat, on starchy vegetables, on grain and red meat. Come to Africa, we're largely inside of the planetary health diet, except for starchy vegetables. And South Asia, which is basically aligned with the planetary health diet today, and the challenge is to keep investing in maintaining and developing traditional diets. Now, from 3 different independent studies, the conclusion is that adopting this planetary health diet would actually reduce premortality within the order of 10 to 11 million people per year. That's an extraordinary finding. It actually corresponds to roughly 24 to 25% of global deaths per year. That is the level of the transition, the benefits for humanity of a transition to a planetary health diet. On sustainability, I'm really proud to say that we can today, from Earth System Science, actually get scientific target for the planetary boundaries of the allowance or responsibility for the food system to stay within a safe operating space for climate, land system, freshwater use, nitrogen recycling, phosphorus recycling, and biodiversity loss. I won't go through the details here. These have been used then, combining the planetary health diet with the sustainability definitions in the scenario analysis that gives us the big, let's say, framing for the major question: can we feed 10 billion people with a planetary health diet within planetary boundaries? And I'm gladly handing over that scenario challenge to Lena Gordon to walk you through the next step in this research in terms of can we or can we not succeed in transforming ourselves back into a safe operating space while securing health for co-citizens on Earth. So good luck with the conference. I'm really sorry not to be with you. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.
So Johan is actually still with us here virtually, and we come back to him in a few minutes with some questions for him. But first of all, he left off with a big question of the Lancet, of whether we could actually feed 10 billion people within the planetary boundaries eating these healthy diets that was proposed. So this was a big question. And in order to be able to answer this question in the Lancet report, what we did was to set up a modeling scenario, or a range of scenarios. So this is a way that we did the modeling in the EAT-Lancet. As you can see, we tested a bunch of different options. So the first was to check whether a scenario of eating the healthy diet that was proposed in the Lancet versus just continuing with the type of trends that we see globally today. The second thing that we looked at was food waste. So here we looked at the scenario of halving the amount of food waste that we have today globally. Then we had 2 different scenarios of production improvements. So if we can improve agriculture so that we get less impact per kilogram of produce. And we had 2 levels of ambitions when we tested this in the scenario runs. And here you see the results of this scenario runs. It looks like a very complicated figure, but I'm going to walk you through it a little bit. Basically, you have on the top here, across the slide, you have the different sustainability, the planetary boundaries that we looked at. And then on the other axis, you have the different types of scenarios. If it's red, we're really unsafe. We're outside of the planetary boundaries. If it's yellow, we're kind of on the boundary of what would be safe. And if it's green, that's when we are within the planetary boundaries. If we look at the first line, that's where we are today, or actually in 2010. This is where we were. As you can see, we were already in 2010. We were outside of the planetary boundaries when it came to climate change, when it came to phosphorus application, and when it came to biodiversity loss. And we were sort of on the boundary for nitrogen. If we look at 2050, in a scenario of continued projections of the current business-as-usual eating patterns, the current production practices, and the full waste, just as much waste in the future as today, this is what it would look like. We would be outside all of the boundaries and substantially over the boundaries. If you follow the table down, you can see there's basically only one scenario where meets all of these criteria and takes us within the planetary boundary, and it's the last one. And that is where we combine both a healthy diet with the most ambitious production improvements there is, with halving food loss and waste. So I guess a good thing after this analysis is that, yes, it is possible to eat a healthy diet for 10 billion people on this planet within the planetary boundaries. But it's only possible if we combine these different efforts of a dietary shift, improved production practices, and halving food loss and waste. Sorry. So the EAT-Lancet both looks at those sort of strategies of the shift in diets, production, and waste, but then also set out a few commitments that needs to happen if we are to achieve this the food transformation that is required. And the first one deals with a commitment at national and international scales towards a healthy diet. And this is something where we need commitment from all sectors in society. It's civil society, it's business, it's policy making, it's all of us actors coming together to make this shift happen. The second one is a shift in production priorities. We have overinvested in a few grains, basically maize, rice, pulses, soybeans. While a lot of other grains that we need to increase the consumption of, we have underinvested for a long time. And we need to shift priorities and improve production practices of the type of produce that we also need to eat more of if we're going to meet this healthy diet. The third one is to also combine these efforts in the agricultural system and among consumers with stronger protection practices of the world's natural ecosystem, so the world's forests and also the world's oceans. And then finally, we need to halve food loss and waste across the globe. This might seem like an easy thing to do, but it's actually quite a dramatic change that needs to happen. And as I said before, it's something that we need everyone on board. It's not one sector that can fix this. But if we're not doing this, there's no way we are going to meet the global development goals that we have set up as a society, within the United Nations. There's no way that we're going to meet the Paris Agreement on climate change. So I think, and it really requires this multi-sector, multi-level action for it to happen. But we can do it, and I guess that's a good point and message of the EAT-Lancet. So that was the end of my presentation, but with that, I'm also going to involve Johan in a couple of questions. So I hope you can hear me now, Johan.
Well, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, thanks and welcome. So this report has received an astonishing amount of recognition since it came out. And it also shows that there is really this strong interest in evidence-based action and to make this thing happen. But there's also raised a lot of debate. And what would you say that are the most sort of controversial aspects or the most issues that have been discussed the most around this report?
No, thanks, Lena. But let me just, before answering that, just apologize for not being with you. It's such a tremendously important change. Let's take this opportunity also, given that we had the EAT Forum in Stockholm last week, to thank you, Greg, and thank the Culinary Institute of America for your tremendous contributions to the EAT initiative across the world. So I think we're really, as you stated in your opening here, a community and a real community to count on in the world. But back to your question, Lena. So I would argue that the biggest and most fundamental misunderstanding in the EAT-Lancet report is this tendency to perceive the Planetary Health Diet as a uniform, top-down, expert-defined diet that is one size fits all across the world, when in fact we're providing the best health science to define a universal, not a uniform, a universal framework for a healthy diet, which allows for a tremendous degree of culinary and cultural diversity, from local dietary cultures in indigenous communities all the way to urban healthy dietary developments from New York to Tokyo. So that's one. The second kind of deeper collision is this misunderstanding that we actually, despite this being the first integrated assessment between health and sustainability on food, we actually kept the analysis apart. So the definitions of the Planetary Health Diet are defined by what is best for a healthy life. It's not based on what do you need to eat to take care of the planet. So the dietary numbers in the Planetary Health Diet on red meat, for example, which is a significant reduction, as Greg pointed out, even can be perceived as aggressive, is not about reducing meat consumption to save the climate or to save the planet. Oh no, it is to improve life expectancy and health for human beings. And then we define the sustainability targets independently of that. So the climate target, the water target, etc., are entirely defined based on the best Earth system science for a stable planet. Then it just so happens that we have win-win solutions. You eat a healthy diet and you actually contribute in a positive way to a stable planet. That synergy has led to misunderstandings. It's quite a surprise that occurs. And then finally, I just want to kind of re-emphasize what I also emphasized in my presentation, which is a tendency of misunderstanding, that we're not proposing a vegan or vegetarian diet. We still have, according to the best scientific assessment we have, 5 servings of animal-based protein, and Walt Wood is much better than me to speak to that science, but it's just to recognize the fact that this is a diet with very high degree of diversity, and therefore also can be adapted to different conditions.
Thank you, Johan. And you will be back in a little bit when we also have a conversation with our next speaker. So let me now introduce the next speaker, because this report was done as a scientific report, but it really needs to be translated into something that's sort of both delicious and actionable. And no one could be better situated to talk about this than Anahita Dondi. Anahita Dondi is the chef manager of a chain of restaurants in India called Soda Bottle Opener Wala. It's a fantastic name, I must say. I was a little bit nervous of how to pronounce it, even, because it's such a long name. But Anahita is a passionate chef, and she's been a cook since she was 10 years old, really taking the traditions of the Parsi kitchen And she's been trained in several different places, but among them the Cordon Bleu in London. And today she's very active within the Indian culinary scene. She has won several awards, including the Young Chef India Award, the Times Food Award, and she is on the Forbes list of 30 people under 30 to watch out for in Asia. She's also part of the Chef Manifesto group. So welcome, Anahita.
Hi, everyone. That was an extremely glamorous introduction. I don't think a chef deserves that, but I think we're slowly getting there, and I'm going to tell you how. A little bit about myself. I'm from New Delhi. I'm a chef, and that's why when I walked in, I was rolling up my sleeves like I was going to cook in a kitchen. But I'm just here to talk to you about the things that we do and how can we sort of connect the EAT-Lancet report in our daily diets, and what can we do as consumers, as chefs, as just people in the world. What is it that we can do? There are two things that I want to talk to you specifically. One is plan-forward diets, and one is food waste. Both these things are critical, and I think as chefs, we are right in the center of the global food system. Today, chefs are looked at very differently from what they were earlier. Earlier, we were just chefs in a kitchen, we were cooks. But now, we've got that privilege of getting out there, talking about our food, connecting to our farmers, which was earlier not seen. There's a plate in front of you. It's a beautiful plate, and I can tell you it's not a stock image. It's something that I created, and it's one of my favorite dishes. That is it's a plant-friendly bowl. And I'm going to tell you how does that kind of come together. For me, food is extremely important. We breathe, we eat, we create food. And what happens to us in our daily lives as chefs, we just keep creating the same thing over and over again. We have a template, we have a format, we keep creating that. But about 3 years ago, I understood that we actually have the power to change and create. And that's when I started experimenting with newer ingredients, with plant-forward ingredients, and with healthy, climate-friendly ingredients. In this bowl that you see here, we've got a component which is a little bit of dairy, some beetroot, which is pickled, carrots, radishes, again, fresh, some leaves, some pomegranate, which is a fruit element, a curry, which has got sweet potato and coconut, and some plantain or raw banana chips. But what's right in the middle, the grain which is there, is actually something that I want to talk to you about. Those are millets. And millets are something that I think everyone should be eating. And the reason I say that millets is something that everyone should be eating is because in India, it's an ancient grain which we've been eating for the last 1,000 years. But we're slowly moving away from it and eating fast food. And that has to stop. So millets are actually grains. We have about 8 different kinds of millets, and each millet has their own protein nutrient quality. It is so good for the soil that it actually makes the soil healthier. It's really good for the climate because it only uses 1/10 the amount of water that rice or wheat does. And it's extremely diverse. You can use it in different ways, and most chefs don't even know about it. So when I learned about it, I actually created recipes in my restaurants in New Delhi and all over India. We've got about 9 restaurants. That is where I think that chefs play a very, very important role because they can get to learn how to use those ingredients. And, okay, can someone do the next slide for me? Thank you. So as a chef, it's not only my responsibility to cook, but actually use ingredients which are plan-forward, which are creative, which can connect me to my consumer and to the farmer. And I've done that with a couple of ingredients like millet and moringa. How is it that we're going to be doing that in our homes? How is it that we're going to be making vegetarian food delicious? We can do that if we only open up to being experimental and creative. And we can do that by trying out new ingredients. we've got about 30,000 species which are edible plants, which we don't use. We only use about 200 to 300 species. And the reason we don't use them is because we're not open to experimenting with them. We don't want to try them because we feel like what we're eating is actually what we should be eating. But what we are not eating is actually not being grown by the farmer anymore, because the farmer doesn't have that value in the market anymore. So we've got an amazing platform which has been created. It's called the Chef's Manifesto. And the Chef's Manifesto is actually a framework. I've got the manifesto right in front of me here. It's a framework which is made by chefs for chefs. And what does this manifesto mean, and how did this manifesto come together? So the manifesto actually has 8 thematic areas. And those 8 thematic areas are actually aligned to the UN SDGs, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And as chefs, we're right in the middle of it. We can do our bits to actually help in creating a better planet for the future generations. And how do we do that? If you look at the 8 thematic areas, there are 2 key areas that I work on. Number 2, which is protection of biodiversity and improved animal welfare. And 6 is a focus on plant-based ingredients. And by all the chefs all over the world, and obviously in this room and in this institute, if we start thinking on those lines, if we start thinking that, okay, hey, we can actually include this into our dish. We don't have to follow the exact same technique, or we don't have to follow the exact same ingredient, but we can actually introduce a new ingredient. Then we can possibly achieve zero hunger. But if we don't make that change, if we don't make that shift, I don't think we're going to be able to do it if we don't start acting right now. And I'm sure all of us keep thinking that, okay, yeah, we want to probably try out bitter gourd, but it's too bitter, so I don't know what to do with it. We need to find a solution. If you put salt on bitter gourd, it actually is not bitter. You can use it, you can cook with it, it's extremely good for you. If you say, hey, I don't want to have wheat, but I actually want to try a millet, you're going to go and buy a barnyard millet and make a dish with that, with a curry, and have it. And you wouldn't even find the difference between that and rice or wheat. So it's just something that we need to think about, and we need to be like, do we want to do this, and do we want to do this together? Today is Sustainable Gastronomy Day. I don't know how many of you know about that, but today is actually Sustainable Gastronomy Day, and it's been declared by the United Nations. And the Chef's Manifesto team all over the world has actually come together with a campaign with the United Nations called Act Now or Climate Action. You can read about it more on chefsmanifesto.com, or you can follow us on Instagram, which will be great for all of us. But just leaving you with a thought. If me as a chef from India, I studied culinary as well, and if I can think on those lines and I can create interesting plant-forward menus and diets, some that you can see at the back, you can actually pick up one seasonal ingredient in your restaurant, focus on that, and share recipes with customers in your restaurant or on social media and create more awareness. So thank you very much.
You have to stay up here. Thank you, Anahita. That's excellent. I was thinking, if we end where the Johan ended also with his question about this, the idea that the EAT-Lancet Diet is actually something that's pushing people to eat more of the same all over the world, versus it's actually sort of a framework to eat where we can eat very differently. Yeah. What would you say to that? I'm thinking you're an Indian chef presenting here in the US.
Yes. So I just want to share with you an insight, which is just a comparative of breakfast, lunch, and dinner that we eat in India and the breakfast, lunch, and dinner that you would eat in America or Europe and any other Western country. So in India, obviously, it's diverse. So you've got north, south, east, west. But 70% of it is vegetarian-focused. And what we do for breakfast is usually something which is plant-based. I'm just going to throw out some names like, poha, which is rice flakes cooked with spices and curry leaves in the morning. Dosa, idli, I'm sure some of you might be familiar with. But if you compare that to a breakfast in the West, it would be bacon, sausages, eggs, hash browns, tomato. If you have lunch, a staple lunch in India is always dal chawal, sabzi roti, which to translate in English is lentils, rice, some kind of stew, which is a vegetarian stew, and flatbread. And then dinner would be, again, the same thing, but a little element of meat in India. But over here in the West, it would probably be a salad with maybe some kind of chicken or tuna, and for dinner it might be something which is a protein, which could be a steak, could be a burger, could be a pasta or a pizza. So just making a simple comparison, I'm sure that we can learn from each other. All of us can learn from each other. And even though Indians now are going out and eating out, and there is an increase in meat intake, but I feel like we're still very deeply rooted in vegetarian plates. And each vegetarian plate can be different. It doesn't have to be the same, and it doesn't have to be boring. So you can actually create delicious things with vegetarian food.
Thanks a lot. I think it sort of shows also the vast diversity of cuisines that we can take up when we are proposing a more plant-forward way of eating. One of the biggest challenges, I think, with the EAT-Lancet is that it sets such an ambitious targets, and the ambitious targets for 2050, that it almost scares people off. Like, how do you even start getting onto that journey? Where can you start? And I'm going to ask both you, and then hope that we can get Johan back online also to hear his reflection of where to start on this journey, so it doesn't feel like it's too big of a leap, that it scares you off from starting on that pathways. Do you want to start reflecting on that?
Yes, so I think if anyone comes into anyone's homes and starts telling you that this is how you're supposed to be eating, and you're eating like this, but you're not eating like that, you would feel hurt and you would probably not want to do it. It's extremely difficult to do that. But I think the stats that we've got from the EAT-Lancet, which says that we have to focus more on plants, on fruits, on nuts, and alternative grains if we want to. We've got stats for it. We know climate change is real, so we have to actually change now. And we can only do that, and I do that on my own personal social media. Just pick a vegetable, a different vegetable every week, and just be like, okay, when did you try something new? So you're not very much out of your comfort zone, but you still make that little change in your diets, and slowly and steadily, I think your plate would be more and more vegetarian friendly.
Thanks. And I think we have Johan back. And Johan, what would you what are your recommendations on where to start on this journey? I mean, I know that you've been working on this type of large-scale transformation also from other sectors, like the fossil fuel sector and the need to decarbonize the economy also.
Yeah, let me start by saying that, as a sustainability scientist, struggling for 30 years to individuals and politicians and business leaders to protect and be stewards of the planet, I must admit that tactically, I think that health is the vector of change we need. This can be the leverage point towards transformative change, because the beauty is that along the lines of what Anahita is sharing with us, we can now, tell a completely new narrative. We can tell a narrative of a pathway that can give us culinary, attractive, diverse dishes on the table and improve our health, and at the same time contributing in a very significant way to stabilizing the climate and protecting biodiversity. It's a fantastic story, and I'm personally quite taken aback by the fact that when trying to in my own family household apply the Planetary Health Diet, I must admit, hand on heart, we're not fully there. It's particularly the kind of dairy side that is challenging, the yogurts and, some parts of the diet. But it's quite interesting how attractive it is and how easy it is to start the journey of a much more plant-forward and balanced diet that raises fruit, nuts, vegetable, legumes, and takes a gradual step towards reducing animal-based sources of protein. So it's quite an exciting situation we're in, and I think that in itself is something we need to help each other to start scaling.
Thanks a lot. So we can't really shift these diets overnight, and it will take some time before we get there, but we really need to start bending the curves and moving quickly into meeting these targets. But what do you want to talk about that where US can be inspired from the cuisines of India to get this journey started?
So I just feel that we're all just a little scared to change our diets because we're used to eating a particular kind of meal or particular ingredients. And I think this is just a message to the chefs in the audience that I studied in culinary school. I studied the same things as you did. But till the time I didn't try something out, I didn't challenge myself that I want to create a plate which is plant-friendly, plant-forward. But not only that, but making it delicious, that a person actually doesn't miss a meat product. I think we have that advantage as chefs in this room and all of us here who love to cook even at home. We can just, experiment and we can try and we might fail, but at least we've taken that leap. And I think till the time we don't take that leap, we're just going to be stuck in this and we're going to be talking about it again and again. But it's important for us to actually put what's there. The findings in the EAT-Lancet report are so real. I think each one of us should include that into our daily diets or follow people who are doing it, and how can we slowly and successfully add that into our diets that we have today.
Thanks. But Johan, especially a question for you. To what extent does this type of changes also be need regulations and legislation to be able to make this shift happen? So what's the role of that national policy changes?
Yeah, I mean, it's of course, a breakthrough, I would argue, that we now have the scientific evidence that if you eat healthy food, you can have better lives and make probably the most important individual contribution towards a stable planet. I mean, a larger contribution than giving up your SUV or stopping flying. So that's very significant, of course. But I'm absolutely convinced, and science supports the fact that we are in for such a rapid transition. I mean, we need to cut global emissions of greenhouse gases by half over the next decade, and we need to start the transformation in the food system over that period of time to stand any chance of keeping global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius. So I think that provides very strong support to the fact that we need to combine, bottom-up efforts that we've been talking about so far in this session about enthusiasm and creating a momentum from individuals and communities with regulatory measures from above. And with regulatory measures, I think we need to combine kind of a package of different regulations, from setting end dates on fossil fuels and unsustainable measures. So you have kind of quantitative regulatory stop dates on unsustainable and unhealthy measures, to put taxes and prices on basically getting a handle on market failures, which is exactly what this is about. I mean, remember that if we continue shortening our lives through unhealthy eating and destroying the planet on the same way, that means that the price tag on that unhealthy, unsustainable food is too low, that the planet and our lives are subsidizing that food. And that's exactly the case we're in. Fast food, processed food, unhealthy food is so cheap that low-income households have no other choice, and we need to have a shift in that balance so it becomes not only more attractive but also very easy for consumers in general to choose, let's say, to make the right choices based on price mechanisms. So I think we need to be quite honest here that we need to put the governance and economic policies right next to the culinary, cultural, individual behavioral changes, because otherwise I doubt that we will be succeeding in this journey.
Thank you, Johan. And those will actually be the final. Warmly thank you, Anahita, for coming here and providing these inspiring ways also how we can think about shifting our food systems. And thanks, Johan, for coming and visiting from your house. Thanks, both of you, for being here. And
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can I take that?
Thank you so much to Lena and to Anahita. I thought that was a wonderful session. I feel like as we read the EAT-Lancet, and for those of you who haven't read it, so often the science feels so separate from where we are, and these scientists who are making decisions, numbers that don't seem to correlate with our everyday lives. So I think it's really wonderful to hear from the scientists themselves. My name is Jacqueline Chi. As Greg noted before, I have the pleasure and the honor of being the interim program director for Menus of Change this year, filling in for Sophie Egan. And now that we've heard about the global scope of the EAT-Lancet report, we'd like to bring things a little bit closer to home, bring them to the United States, and talk about how these numbers, how this report ties into our own initiatives here at Menus of Change, how it ties into Plant Forward, the Plant Forward work that we have been doing. To do so, we've assembled an expert panel led by my good friend and colleague, Anne McBride. Anne is likely familiar to many previous experiences at Menus of Change. She's also the program director for our Worlds of Flavor International Conference, which just celebrated its 20th anniversary last year. And she's also the program director for our Global Plant Forward Culinary Summit, which just got inaugurated. We just launched the first one of those in May. You'll be hearing more about those programs later during the conference, but Anne is, in addition to those two roles, she is also the new Deputy Director of the Torre Barra Mediterranean Center, bringing her experience to bear in advancing research and innovation around the Mediterranean diet. Please help me welcome Anne McBride, as well as all of our esteemed panelists, to the stage.
I'll let you guys go first. Good afternoon, everyone. Jackie, thank you for this introduction. We are going to continue some of the conversation that started in the previous panel, very ably led by Lena. We are going to talk about implementation, which there's the very optimistic view of how do we implement those targets. There is then the more realistic one that I think is one of the questions why we've all assembled here for the next 3 days. I'm going to start after introducing the panel by having everyone give a short 3 to 4 minute framing presentation that will then guide what they will be talking about throughout. So to my left, you know Lena. You just met her. Next to her is Christopher Gardner, who jumped in to fill in for Eric Adams, who unfortunately was unable to come at the last minute. Christopher Gardner is one of the founding members and creators of the Menus of Change principles, as he would like to be known, as well as one of the founding members of the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. When he's not busy at CIA and Harvard things, he is the Ranborg Farquhar Professor of Medicine at Stanford, the director of Stanford Prevention Research Center, Nutrition Studies Group, and the director of the SPRC Postdoctoral Research Fellow Training Program. Next to him is Afia Ibomu, who is a holistic nutritionist at fitclub.com. She has followed a plant-based diet for nearly 20 years and will, of course, tell us a little bit how she's done that. Her fourth book, The Vegan Remix, was named one of the best vegan cookbooks of the year by Vegetarian Times Magazine, and her what a great title, was nominated for an African American Literary Award for Cookbook of the Year. She's also the co-host of the RBG Fit Club podcast, and she's also a noted crochet designer. Next to Afia is Walter Willett, who is also one of the founding members of the Principles and of Menus of Change, professor of epidemiology, public health, and professor of medicine at the Harvard Medical School in Boston. He was the chair of the department for 25 years, and he's the co-chair of the EAT-Lancet Commission, which we will continue to discuss here. So without further ado, I'm going to give you, Walter and Linda, the stage for your initial comments to take us through this session.
I have a slide somewhere in the slideshow deck there, but I'm not actually someone who's on the front line translating this into foods that people eat on a daily basis, but I view my job as providing mainly the scientific support to help guide us in a direction that will be both healthy and sustainable. And just as a little brief update from the EAT-Lancet report, Greg raised, are we doing enough today? Are we on our path? And unfortunately, you heard on the environmental side, we're very much off the path, but also on the health side, we in the United States are very much off the path. Maybe obesity rates were stabilizing or going down a little bit in the United States, but as you'll see in the more updated data, after that little pause about 2010 or so, the rates have been going back up in both men, women, boys, and girls. And that's really troublesome. We've hit just about 40% obese, and on top of that, another 30% overweight. And even if those rates were not going up at all, we would continue over the next 30, 40 years to see increases in the downstream consequences of obesity increasing. So, but the trouble is we haven't stabilized. Obesity is still going up. And the reality is that I think as many people know, just becoming obese doesn't mean the next day you drop dead. It means that over the next decade or so, you're much higher at risk for type 2 diabetes. And once you get type 2 diabetes, there are not immediate consequences of that outside of having to take some medication perhaps. But by 10 or 20 years out, you're at about 12 times the risk of having a heart attack. And maybe you'll survive that with good luck, although a fairly high percentage of people don't survive that. And over the next decade or so, they may develop renal failure and be on dialysis for quite a while. And the death certificate will say, died of renal failure. But the reality is they really died of getting obese a few decades earlier. So that's the sad reality of what's happening to the US population. And a few years ago, our colleague Dr. Ludwig and some others did some projections based on data that predicted that life expectancy in the United States would actually be going down. If I could have the next slide. And that's what's actually happening in the United States. That downward trend got a bit of a boost by the opioid epidemic, but that's on top of this broader underlying trend of obesity going up and the consequences of obesity starting to hit home as that generation who became obese as children are now entering midlife. And we see the rates of obesity-related cancers, 6 out of 12 obesity-related cancer rates are now going up in population under age 50, where they had been going down. Colon cancer, for example, had been going down very steadily. It's turned around among population under age 50, going up again now. So we are, the sad reality is we are not doing enough. We've heard lots of positive outcomes, and people, I know people in this room, many of us working hard at this issue, trying to reverse this epidemic, but in fact, it's getting worse. Of course, the average numbers don't tell the whole story. either, because there's an upper income, upper educated group. You see them shopping at Whole Foods. Mostly they're doing pretty well, actually. Their life expectancy is going up pretty fast, but the middle's not doing very well, and lower income, lower educated groups are actually experiencing declines in life expectancy and driving that trend downward in the United States. So, as you can see here, that the average Japanese person, when they're doing pretty well, lives about 6 years longer than Americans do at this point in time, and that's really pretty dismal. Just a quick word about the red meat issue and what were said to be challenging or aggressive numbers there. It does depend on where you sit. And are the numbers for red meat really that out of line with healthy eating or with reality of what people have done over the years? The number, as was shown in that table there from the EAT-Lancet report for red meat, was 14 grams a day. Now, it's not that we're eating little half-ounce nano burgers once a day. That does amount, and we do need to do more in translating this to language that people understand. It's about a hamburger a week, or a dish made with, a mixed dish made with beef or lamb or pork. Or if you really like big, juicy 12-ounce steaks, that's about once a month. And that's actually, as was pointed out, what the traditional Mediterranean diet was back in the 1960s, when Greek men were living 4 years longer than American men. Red meat was not an everyday event. It was something that you either had on Sunday in modest amount, or for Christmas or Easter or some other holiday or celebration, you had it in larger amounts. And I like to describe it in the way that I like lobster. I really love lobster. But I have it, maybe 3 times a year or something like that, and it's really special. So I think we have to just change our mindset a little bit, that there is a way to have a wonderful, as was said, delicious diet that's also a very healthy diet as well.
We will come back to that in further questions to talk specifically about meat and about those targets there, and especially what it means for food service in this case. Lena?
I had basically 3 things that I think it's important to keep in mind when you start using the EAT-Lancet and translating it into what is important in operation. The first one has to do with the sustainability targets, because I think the Planetary Health Diet, it's fairly easy to understand what it would mean for an individual, for a household, for a meal-producing company, etc. It's translatable at many different scales. But the sustainability targets that we set in the EAT-Lancet, they are global targets for how much water use we can use globally, or how much greenhouse gas emissions globally. And that's much more difficult to scale. So I think we have quite a bit of work to do on making sure that production is also improving. It's not about just shifting diets, but we really need also, and as actors in here, to think about how you source the produce, and source the produce from producers that are really taking on the sustainability agenda as well. And I think we still have quite a bit of work on how to translate it to actionable targets there. But that shouldn't mean that we forget about that agenda. The other part is translating it to what it means in different regions. So we've done a report recently for the Nordic region. So Nordic region is Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, and Iceland. So translating this global report and what it means in action on the ground in this area. And something that was clear from that report is both that we pride ourselves in the Nordic region as being kind of best in class in many production systems, and especially in the dairy and livestock sector. We have really good goals for animal welfare, lower antibiotic use, etc., and very low sort of sustainability impacts if you compare with other nations. However, we dramatically overconsume, at least compared to the EAT-Lancet diet. So there's a big issue here for the livestock sector in Sweden and the dairy sector of how much then should we, in the future, sort of have an export strategy because we have such good practices, or should we just change our production system as well to produce more pulses and legumes, etc. We also have a very strong public sector, so we serve 3 million public meals every day. In Sweden, that's a lot for a country with 10 million inhabitants, but that also gives us advantages that public sector investment is really where we could have big leverage also. So in that sense, it's also good to think about what in our regional context are the most important leverage points for change. We also saw that we import a lot of food, so actually 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions are not from what we consume in the Nordic region, doesn't come from Nordic production systems, but systems, well, actually 50% don't come from the production systems in Nordic regions and 50% externally. So we really need to think about the global value change in this shift. And very quickly, the last point is that I think if from a sustainability point, climate has been the key entry point to much of the discussion. The next one will be biodiversity, and we see that coming very strongly now, and I think that's something that also goes very well in hand with a lot of what chefs are also can do something positive with. How do we actually increase the culinary the diversity in the kitchen, and how can we embrace biodiversity as a way of also eating more healthy and more sustainable?
And that's a great plug for the final general session here on Thursday morning, which will be about biodiversity. Jackie, do we have time for the video? Okay, perfect. So our next presentation is a video presentation, and it explains why it's a video presentation as part of it. It's an address by Gina McCarthy, director of the Center for Climate, Health, and Global Environment at the Harvard T.H. Chan of Public Health, and she is also a former administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. So she is, as part of this video, making the environmental and sustainable case that will inform also this session.
Thank you, Menus of Change, for bringing together so many leaders across the food industry to talk about food, health, and sustainability. What an incredible opportunity to learn from one another and embrace our personal and our collective responsibility to take action on climate change. Because climate change is here and it's now, and it's already disrupting our food systems. It's one of the most personal impacts of climate that you will see. What could be more closer to home than the food we eat and what we feed our children? What could be more pressing than making sure that our actions today support a future that will provide enough healthy food for our kids and their kids? With climate change, we're looking at how to feed a growing population while confronting more intense heat, droughts, and floods, on top of the environmental challenges we already face from industrial agriculture. And science now tells us that rising carbon dioxide levels can make staple crops like rice and wheat less nutritious. We need to change the way we think about producing food so that the planet can feed us now and for generations to come. You know, today 55% of the rivers and stream miles in the United States are too heavily contaminated with nutrients from runoff to have healthy ecosystems. Droughts and floods will force communities to choose between enough drinking water or producing enough food for their children to eat. And in today's world, that has to be simply unacceptable for any community to have to face that choice. Ensuring we have a sustainable food system is a big challenge, but it is by no means insurmountable. Everyone sitting in this room is an important part of designing solutions. Your engagement can help shape the way we produce our food, and with your creativity, we can find paths forward to make healthy and sustainable eating enjoyable for everyone. And that is really the key, helping us grow healthy food that people will not only embrace, but demand. So how do we grow food to make sure that we have rich soil, that we don't rely on fossil fuel fertilizers and pesticides, and that actually regenerate our soil, which is the lifeblood of our planet. How do we make the shift to organically based farming? How do we keep food local? How do we stop wasting 40% of the food that we produce between our farm and our table? If food loss and waste were a country, it would be about the third or fourth largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. Right now, I'm awaiting the birth of my new granddaughter. Yoo-hoo! That's why I'm not with you today. She is, for me, the face of climate change. She will only be 31 years old in 2050, and that's the year when science tells us we have to be well on our way to a zero carbon future if we hope to keep carbon pollution levels down so we can avoid the most destructive impacts of climate change. So I ask each of you, find a way to make climate change personal and make it personal for everyone you speak to. Get people to understand that it is not about polar bears and glaciers. It's about our children and grandchildren and their future. In many ways, we hold that future in our hands because of the decisions we make today that will inevitably shape their world. It is possible to feed the world a healthy and sustainable diet by 2050, but it will require major changes in what we eat and how we produce our food. I have no doubt that we can make that happen, but it will take the engagement of people in all countries if we hope to succeed. Climate change is by far the biggest public health threat that we face today, but we do have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to take actions to ensure a healthier, cleaner, and a more just future. And nothing is more central to that future than nutritious food for all. Thank you.
So Afia, Gina provided a wonderful segue to you because you have been leading the pack as a vegan for 20 years, who's created a huge body of work of inspiration and leadership. So please tell us a little bit about what you do.
Okay, are we gonna play our video?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want to start with your video?
Yeah, let's start with the video.
All right, so roll it.
I'm Stick from Dead Prayers. I'm a hip-hop artist, producer, author, father, fitness advocate, long-distance running coach.
My name is Afia Ibomu, and I'm a mother and a wife and author, and I'm a holistic nutritionist. Food to me is healing. You know, first, your food is your medicine. It's nourishing. It's also an expression of Mother Nature. Music definitely had a big impact on my journey so far. KRS-One, the hip-hop artist, had a song out called Beef about being a vegetarian and the food industry. It definitely made me say, this is where I need to be, this is where I need to start.
Yo, it's bigger than! What? Do it! Do it! We scored a big hit with our song, Bigger Than Hip Hop, and Dave Chappelle picked it up, and world touring. You know, my lifestyle in general is typical rap lifestyle. Burgers, booze, blunts, you know what I mean? Just party life. Till one day I woke up with a swollen ankle out of nowhere, early 20s. We went to the doctor and got the diagnosis, and they said, hey dude, you got gout, right? So I always thought, you know, gout is an elder disease or whatever, right? So here I am, 20, with gout, you know? And Afia, she put me on a plant-based diet, and I healed. Health matters, and how we live matters. If we're saying that, you know, people in the urban communities' lives do matter, it's not just when somebody, an innocent person, is murdered, because we lose more lives to burglars than we do to bullets. So Fit Hop is a combination of things. It's hip hop, mantras and affirmations and, you know, like guided meditation almost.
If I leave the gym without my muscles shaking like a vibrating bass drum, I'm violating. If I ain't making it.
Yeah, we got a message, and yeah, it's a higher purpose than just boom bap.
Some people don't feel like they matter, but I've been doing this long enough to see my choices matter.
So we bring the streets to veggie living, gangsters going green. Every aspect of my life has been revolutionized through plant-based living.
I think we have some slides as well, but that was just kind of an introduction of me and my husband. We have a brand called RBG Fit Club, and our goal is to inspire healthy living, and we do that through our products, books, music, and a podcast. Here are 3 of our books: Eat Plants, Lift Iron. My husband gained 20 pounds, all plant-based, and that was his experiment and his journey. People feel like if you eat plant-based, you're just gonna be skinny and don't have no weight on you. So that is proof that it can happen. My first book, The Vegan Soul Food Guide to the Galaxy, was just a combination of all the questions that I had got over the past years of how to be a healthy vegan. I've been plant-based for 29 years. And so it's about where to get your nutrients, where to shop, what to buy, where to eat out anywhere in the world as a vegan. So it's a cookbook and a guide. So we also have recipes like candy yams, collard greens, cornbread, sweet potato pie, potato salad, everything we love from soul food, but no white rice, white flour, or white sugar in the recipes as well. And then our newest book, The Vegan Remix, came out of my family's food allergies. And that book is a soulful spin on world cuisine because I kind of wanted to expand the cuisine of plant-based living, so it's not just soul food, but there's plant-based foods all over the world. And it's called the Vegan Remix because I remixed international foods vegan, and it's also 100% gluten-free and allergy-friendly. And I also added music. We infuse hip-hop into everything we do. So these are some classic hip-hop album cover remakes that are also in the book. The Chronic from Dr. Dre, and then the Ice-T album remake. And next we also have if you can go to the next slide, we have a podcast, the RBG Fit Club podcast, and it comes out twice a month. Me and my husband have funny, light conversations about serious holistic health subjects, and we talk about hot topics, but it's from a science point of view, history, world culture, as well as just fun and creative ways to dispel certain myths, like how can you eat healthy and it be affordable. So one of our podcasts is 7 Ways to Eat Good on a Hood Budget. So we really try to, in every single podcast, leave people with actionable steps that they can do and ways to incorporate different healthier things into their life. Pimp Your Morning, that's about just having a morning routine and how that can make you healthier over time. Meditation, get your mind right. So we talk about a whole bunch of things for holistic health. And then in the next slide, music is also infused in our brand. As my husband was saying, he started a genre called Fit Hop. So that is hip hop music, 808 beats, hardcore lyrics, but focused only on healthy living, working out. The Workout was his first album. So things like Blood Pumping, I Can Get Swole Like Tookie. Healthy Gangster is actually one of the newest albums that just came out this year from an artist from our label, Coach Nim. He's actually a physical trainer and he works with Parkinson's patients, but he's also an MC. And his album just came out this year and is doing awesome. And out cussing, there's no cussing, there's no N-word, there's no calling women out their name. We realize, and there's scientific studies, that when you repeat things in your mind over and over again, they become mantras, they become things that will help you actually change your life. And so that's kind of what the music is, and how we want to help people to live healthier lifestyles. And the last slide is just RBG Fit Club. Our goal is to inspire healthy living. Membership is living it through our 5 rest and consistency. And we realize that you can, because we've been doing it so long, that you can have all the information in the world, but what is going to actually make someone change and do something? You know, so our goal is to motivate and inspire healthy living through everything that we do.
Great, thank you. Christopher, one big question, of course, when we talk about meat reduction, for a lot of people is immediately, but how will I get my protein? So can you give us your elevator speech on protein, please?
Yeah, I don't know why you don't get any protein. I hope you make it off the stage. So I have a great Menus of Change story here on protein, because at the second meeting that we held, I was invited to give an 8-minute protein 101. And I did that, and jaws were dropping, and I said, why? This is basic nutrition. I've been teaching human nutrition to Stanford undergrads for 17 years now. There's amino acids, there's carbs, and there's fats. So we went on and sort of developed a whole paper that I'll link you to in a bit when I'm at the end of this. But as we walked through this whole protein thing to make the story as clear as we could, there's 20 amino acids. Some of them are essential. There's a myth that plants are missing a couple. The truth is grains are a little low in lysine and beans are a little low in methionine. And so the way I've been playing this up in a story is to talk about the game of Scrabble. How many of you have ever played Scrabble in your life? Okay, awesome. So this should work for a lot of you. So you remember there's 100 tiles, and there's that's 4 of each letter in Scrabble, right? There's 4 of every letter in Scrabble. No, there's not. There's like 12 N's and E's, and there's 1 Z and Y. So picture this. I think there's 4 H's. So picture lysine is H, and you're missing 1 from your bag of letters. And maybe there's 3 or 4 D's, and you're missing 1, and that's like the beans. So it's not like they're missing, they're limiting. And then imagine this. The guidelines for protein are 0.66 grams per kilogram of body weight per day is an average requirement. 0.8 is a recommended daily allowance, which is not your requirement. It's 2 standard deviations above the estimated average requirement, so that it exceeds or covers 97.5% of the population. And Americans eat about double that. So imagine playing Scrabble, and you're missing a couple letters, but somebody gives you 2 bags of Scrabble. 2 bags of Scrabble letters, and they're both missing a couple. What happens when you get to the end of the game with 1 bag? The board is full. There's no place to put any more. So where would you put the second bag? Well, it's the same with protein. You turn all that extra protein into carbon fat. There's no place to store it in your body. And so this idea of limiting amino acids being a problem for vegetarians, it isn't. It's almost irrelevant. So we wrote this up in a paper, and we said, what if we ate 25% less protein? And we shifted 25% from animal to plant, not even going vegan. And everybody got more than the recommended daily allowance with that scenario. And then we counted back the greenhouse gas lowering and the water lowering. And so there was a win for the environment, and there was a win for human health. So we wrote that up. It's in Nutrition Reviews. It got published in February. C. Gardner. Actually, I just started tweeting, so if you go Gardner PhD, I have a free link to the article on Gardner PhD. And then we've also recently, with David Katz, just come out with a recommendation to the FDA. A petition is going around that we redefine protein quality. Historically, it was defined as amino acid distribution and digestibility, and we've suggested that we add human health, the foods that are rich in protein. What else do they come with in terms of saturated fat, fiber, et cetera? And environmental consequence. So we're asking to redo the definition of protein quality, because at the end of the day, people are freaked out about protein and they're getting way more than they need. They're fearing carbohydrate and they're eating less, and the whole intact grains and the good carbohydrates that we like are full of fiber for the microbiome, which is a super hot topic. So we've got this imbalance between whole good carbs and protein. And so our paper, the second paper about the protein quality thing came out in Advances in Nutrition just a month ago. So we have 2 recent papers with evidence. That's what I do as a scientist, evidence. We need less protein. Don't be freaked out. Afia is going to be fine. I swear to God. She's going to get off the stage just fine. And I'm happy to add that perspective if it helps to the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Christopher. We have a limited amount of time, unfortunately, for what could be a 5-hour discussion. So your next answers should be as succinct as you're able to for this very, very complex topic. One of the things that, hearing the previous session and then this one that strikes me is, so we have the EAT-Lancet Commission, we have the 24 Menus of Change Principles, we have the Chef's Manifesto, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Are we at a risk of guidance overload? And do all of these make it even more complicated for the audience to actually know what to do and which to follow? And this year is EAT-Lancet. Is there, what's your way to address that, to tell people to sort through all of the information and know what to do?
I think since they all point in the same direction, I think that it's just fine. It just shows the evidence is there. This is the direction we have to move in. And on a very general level, I think it's sort of fairly simple messages that comes out with a plant-forward approach, a bit more diverse, etc. But then you can go into this and you can get a bit more guidance. I mean, EAT-Lancet helps you say how big is the shift that needs to happen. So what's the quantitative target that I should have? And then menus of change is sort of helping to see also and assess, are we getting towards that target? What are the direction of change? Are we doing enough? There's a big inspiration also of different, I think it's 8 different principles that you need to or you should be inspired by in the kitchen. So I think they fill different purposes.
Hafia, how do you feel about that in terms of, as the target audience in a way of all of that information?
Well, I think that what we say is just eat more plants, specifically greens. So you should be having a green vegetable with every single meal. And some people are like, what does that mean for breakfast? You can add some spinach to some scrambled tofu or to a smoothie, or if you eat eggs, that kind of stuff. Kind of start there with small things that people can do daily, drinking enough water, at least a minimum of 64 ounces. If you are going to eat meat, it should be organic, it should be wild, no more than 3 ounces a day, that kind of stuff. So we just try to start in small ways and where people are at. So even though I'm a vegan, I'm a nutritionist, and the men in my household eat fish because they have different food allergies and things like that. So I'm making 2 different proteins pretty much every day. But we just start with that, like, where are you? If you're eating McDonald's every day, then stop doing that. You know what I'm saying? Cook more at home, reduce your processed foods, and also not just reducing your meat, but also increasing your vegetables, is what we say. Half your plate vegetables, things like that.
This is a great segue to a question I have for Walter, and you hinted at the 14 grams of red meat in your opening remarks. So for those of you who have read the Lancet report, there are ranges, right? In terms of what should be our intake. And there's a possible range 0 to in the case of all vegetables, for example, 200 to 600. In the case of beef and lamb, that's a good one was a range 0 to 14. So can you explain that a little bit more? Because it's not that, so yes, if you increase your greens, or you can increase your plant-based foods as much as possible, right? But if you decrease your fish, it doesn't mean you can increase your red meat, correct? Can you explain that a little bit and how we actually deal with those ranges?
Right. It is a little bit complex because nutrition is complex, and I liken it to an orchestra. You need all the pieces there, and you need them in the right balance. And you can shift around a little bit, but still, fish is there for a reason. People do need omega-3 fatty acids. There's an open question. Will it be just as good to get them all from plants? You can, But the evidence so far we have is that it's good to have a modest amount of fish in the diet. So swapping that for beef doesn't work. But we put in ranges to give maximum flexibility and still stay within what we see by evidence is a healthy range for nutrition. And I'll take dairy as another example. There, the range was 0 because dairy is not essential, and lots of people around the world, major nations, live with almost no dairy as adult, so it can be 0. And the upper part of the range was 2 glasses a day equivalent. Now that could be in the form of yogurt or cheese. So that range 0 to 2 seems to be pretty compatible with health. If I go higher, and there are some negative consequences, so we took the midpoint of that range as a starting target. And then later in the report, as was mentioned by Lena, we did sensitivity analyses and looked to see if these target numbers would fit within a sustainable diet globally, and with reducing waste by 50% and substantially improved agricultural practices, it would. But then we said, will it work if we go up to, instead of 1 serving a day of dairy, go to 2 servings a day? And then it doesn't work. We can't stay within the planetary boundaries. And that number for meat, which 14 grams a day is the target number with a range up to double that for red meat. But we put some ranges also so people could swap. In India, that Muslims don't want to eat the pork, and the Hindus don't want to eat the cows, so they can shift back and forth. That kind of flexibility for religious or cultural reasons is important to make this adaptable to most populations. If we let the number for amount of red meat go up to about 1.5 ounces per day per person, we can't stay within the planetary boundaries either. So the realities are pretty tight here if we want to have a global population that has a healthy and sustainable diet. So there's a lot of flexibility, but there are real limits. We are pushing the limits as we project them out to about the 10 billion we'll have by 2050. And the really, I think, urgent need was mentioned. We have to make big changes within the next 5 or 10 years if we're going to stay within those limits. So maybe that's a complicated answer to your question. Well, there's flexibility, but there are realistic limits.
I'm thinking some of that is actually, or seems fairly easy to accomplish at home. Although it is frightening to hear Johan, who was, the co-commissioner, was Walter of the co-chair of the commission, was Walter, to say he is not yet at the goals. Are you? Are any of you at the targets? You probably are. You are also? Always? Yeah? Walter? Yeah. Okay, so it's a Johan issue.
There are some, again, I have meat 3 times a year maybe, or once or twice, and then I do some more fish and a little more poultry. So again, there's that kind of flexibility.
But so at home, you can control that, or you can cook, and I think that's one of the issues that is often facing the food service industry, where we are, you are where we indulge, right? That's the one place where maybe we have meat once a year, or we have more fish when we go out because we don't want to cook it at home. So how can a chef, or should a chef, actually deal with those ranges and these targets and know what to do? And is it the responsibility of the chefs to actually do that, or is it our responsibility as diners?
I would say yes, because I've been plant-based for so long, and there's only certain restaurants that I can eat at, because I don't want just steamed broccoli and some roasted portobello mushrooms, you know what I'm saying? So I feel like people who are making certain recipes that are plant-based are not necessarily immersed in the plant-based culture to know what people want to eat when they do go out. You know what I'm saying? So I want like a bowl with some barbecue tofu and sweet potatoes, and something that's very hearty and healthy. And I don't really get that out a lot unless I'm eating at like a Thai place or an Indian place or an Ethiopian place, So I feel like it's the chef's responsibility to have more options that are plant-based, that are actually filling and tasty and satisfying.
Christopher, yes?
I would say not so much a responsibility, but an opportunity. I don't know if you'd paid attention to the Gen Zers lately, but they want eclectic taste, they want global fusion of flavors, and they are really into social justice. They are tuning into this, and they're going to be eating for the next 50 years. So if you want patrons in your restaurant for the next 20 and 30 years, the nice thing about the protein flip is it's not vegetarian or vegan. It can be, but it's not. It's just much less. It's an ounce or two of meat on a dish, not 6. And I guess my question is, that seems so simple to just take a big piece of flesh and put it in the middle of the plate. I'm sure there's culinary skill there, but to take grain, fish or chicken on it, and herbs, and I just feel like that's an incredible opportunity that the Gen Zers are going to love, and they're going to be your patrons for longer than us old farts who are going to die, even though we eat really well, sooner than them.
Yes, Walter.
Yeah, well, I think the answer is why we're having this gathering here and why a lot of us took a little time off our daytime job to come here, because we are counting on the culinary world, the chef world, to make this something that's aspirational. We can't sell a deprivation diet, we know that. And we have to have eating this way be something people want to do because it's smart, it's the good thing to do, it's for their children, their grandchildren, and it's something that tastes good as well, as we've all heard. And we do know it's possible, but it takes a reorientation of, I think, what we grew up with and what chefs were taught to 20 or 30 years ago. But it's absolutely critical to have not just vegetarian options there, but to have them be wonderful options there that people enjoy and want to have.
And this is, I don't know that that's a question that you guys can answer, but it does require a certain reconception of operation system, of menus, in a way, because the question of the big piece of meat, and we've covered that at Menus of Change many times before, it's a question not just of skills, but it's a question of money and revenue, et cetera, and what people are willing to pay for. And people are not yet willing to pay $35 for a bowl of grains and vegetables, however amazing and flavorful, and how much more time and labor and great production practices it's taken, right? So, I mean, I don't know if any of you wants to talk about that, but the financial model and the business model that this requires. And the type of shift, how can you help chefs make that shift from a business perspective also? Is it in supplying science that can help push policies that make that business easier? Is it in terms of convincing customers to demand for other things and be willing to pay for more?
I think a fascinating angle here is portion size, right? So we're in this mindset that more food piled higher for less money is better. But there's a shift there too, right? People are now paying more money for smaller amounts of food. I'm really curious to interact with chefs. So the grains are going to cost less than the meat, but the grains and the veggies and the other things are more labor intensive, right? So this is for us scientists to say, oh, the bulk grains and the bulk beans, those are cheaper, just serve those. But to make them attractive and gorgeous and unapologetically delicious is a higher labor cost. So I'm really anxious to work with the chefs, and this is what we're doing at Stanford with the 16 executive chefs there. What is this balance between health and labor cost and total cost? So we can't raise the price of the meal programs for the Stanford students, but they're doing it. They are finding ways to keep the price down, innovative ways to work on the labor costs. And at the end, the grains and the beans cost much less than the meat, especially much less than the grass-fed meat. And then to get the grass-fed meat, we should be having, that part right there is really clear. Grass-fed meat, pasture-raised stuff would be better, but it's expensive. Oh, so have less. Have less meat, better meat, on top of this global fusion of grains and lentils.
Afia, you also want.
The meat and dairy industry is my mic on? Subsidized. You know what I'm saying, on a government level. So I think that affects the cost as well. And I worked at the Department of Juvenile Justice for a while and working on trying to incorporate more plant-based foods for kids who were locked up. And I realized that even the recipes that were in the system we're not the best recipes, like, you know what I'm saying? So I feel like if we definitely have to do things more on a policy governmental level as far as incorporating more plant-based foods, subsidizing organic farmers for fruits and vegetables as opposed to giving all that money for more industrialized beef and things like that.
Walter?
Yeah, there's no simple answer to this, and I appreciate the job of a restaurateur, a food service operator, is challenging and complex. Thank goodness I do simple things. But some people are making this work. As Chris said, at the University of Mass Canton's operation there is making money, and it's one students love it. It's aspirational. They're learning while they're eating at the same time. We need creativity. Just putting some beans and grains on a plate isn't going to be enough. But even Afia is absolutely right. Our system is on balance in pricing policies, and we have to change that because the real cost of eating red meat is not incorporated in with the price you pay at the counter. The environmental costs are not there, and we have to change the pricing to reflect the true costs. But we can't wait for that because everybody here knows that's not going to change for the next year. And we have to move forward. So we need to approach this from all different directions. But the good news is that some people, despite this unbalanced pricing network, are making this making this happen. And I'm particularly impressed with the University of Massachusetts. It's working at Harvard too, but we're an elite, expensive school. This is a university state school. It's not a fancy school, and it's working there. So I think that's really impressive.
I just want to add to the question of grain and beans, that really good grains and really good beans cost a lot of money, as they should, right, when they are produced right, when they are heirloom and everything. So on one hand, it's always great when it is made accessible to as many. We're still very busy, that is still so needed to fill, right? That this food is not just an elitist privilege, a world of privilege. In our last couple of minutes, I want to talk about the role that technology is playing in this world, in this plant-based world, with things like Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat that have taken such a big part of the market in such a quick amount of time. And I was just in that Forbes article Greg mentioned, between the year 2017-2018, the sale of plant-based food grew by 20% versus something like 2% for all foods. And some predictions say that by 2050, the have taken 50% of the meat business. Obviously, certain players control that world. This is actually those are very expensive products, a lot of those. At the Plan Forward conference in May, one of the chefs presenting was telling us how, never mind the blended burger with beef and mushroom, he was blending Impossible Burger with mushroom to make that go longer, just because it's so expensive. So, what is your take on this emerging but very, very strong category, Lena? And does that work with meeting the Commission targets?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's an important part of the puzzle, and I think as we explore different ways of eating more plant-forward, I think it includes both this sort of mimicking the type of food that we eat today so that it's easy to replace. So like the Impossible Burger or the similar products that it's easy to swap, and you can sort of cook the same meal as we do today, but with different ingredients. But I think in parallel with that, you need to have this other part that is also changing a bit how we cook and what type of plates that we make, and get inspiration of how to make plant-forward cuisine different also to today. In combination with new innovations also and experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think too that it's good that we have Impossible Burger because we need lots of creativity and lots of options because people are in different places. That particular product is not the healthiest product. It's not going to be as good as the burger, veggie burger my wife has made, or I suspect that Afia can make. Also, something that's much healthier than that and actually more flavorful as well. But again, I think it's like a nicotine patch. If people are really having trouble getting off of red meat, well, that's better than the real thing. But it's not as healthy, and it's expensive because you have to make it out of products. There's a lot of industrialization there. To go back to labor costs, I'm counting on robots to help us there. That chopping and a lot of these things. Well, MIT can make robots to prepare meals and things like that. We should look at that side of the technology too, out of perhaps really whole, healthy food. So we can use technology in lots of ways, and also distribution, preservation. We're going to need to pull out all stops here, and we should again use our imagination. And having more options, the better. And we'll see what works. And different people will want different options at any one time.
NPR on the drive up had something about robots and automatization, and one of the, to end on a Marxist note, because why not, who controls the means of production when robots and foods grown in labs in a way dominate the market, however good they are for the environment? I mean, what are we giving up at the human scale there? Should we end on this? Sorry, Greg. Afia, I want to hear your take on the Impossible Burger, though, before we close.
Well, as you said, they're not the healthiest foods, but they are good transitional foods. And actually, Beyond Meat just went public, in the stock market, and the stock went up like 300%. And I feel like if we can have healthier options that have that much momentum behind them and are actually affecting the economic growth of the country, then that's how we can have more change. Because people are like, wow, I didn't know, fake meat was going to have this much of a response. You know what I'm saying? But also the health part, though, like a lot of people in our market are like, that's not healthy, and I don't want to eat that. I'm only eating alkaline, and they follow certain people like Dr. Sabi, and that's like a no-no to them. Even soy or processed soy is a no-no to them. So it's a balance of those things I think we have to kind of work on. And I just want to say quickly also, I feel like artists and influencers are a big part of kind of changing the dynamic and the conversation of eating healthier. Like Big Sean is a rapper who's talking about going vegan. DJ Khaled is doing almond milk commercials. Jay-Z and Beyonce just put out a book with the guy who did 22 Days Vegan. So I think artists and influence have a big part in just helping to change the conversation around this also.
Great, and a great note to end on. This conversation will continue in 2 breakouts tomorrow with some I think Lynn and Walter, you are on both breakouts, and then others will join you at various points. Thank you so much, and I'll give it back to Jackie.
Thank you so much to Anne and everybody on the panel. Let's give them just one more round of applause here. As Anne mentioned, Lena and Walter will be on breakout sessions tomorrow in the morning and in the afternoon. If you have additional questions, they'll have time at that time to answer questions about the EAT-Lancet report and other aspects of what they were discussing. Afia and Walter, if you were entranced by Afia's description of her books, they'll both be signing books downstairs during our reception. Which is also featuring our leading sponsors this evening. Speaking of the reception, you may have noticed it's a little bit wet outside. So instead of the regularly scheduled reception in the outside beverage garden plaza, we're actually going to be going downstairs to the lower level. And before I send you off to the reception, since we are talking about sustainability, wanted to talk a little bit about sustainability at the conference. You'll see at all of our waste receptacles, we've got compost, landfill, and trash. And here's just, oh, sorry, let's skip to the next slide first. There we go, thank you. So we've got compost, landfill, and recyclable items. This may look daunting. What do you put where? I don't know. Was it this? Was it that? One way to think of it is really almost everything can be either composted or recycled. And when you generally think about things that need to be recycled, like cans or bottles, those are going to go in recycling. Almost everything else can be composted except for snack pack plastic wrappers, yogurt cups, and tea bags. Those are basically the only things you're putting in trash. So please do help us by putting the items in the appropriate places. If we could go back to the previous slide, for the reception, we've got some fun things here for you. This is our hold-a-plate. This is our keep cup. If you ordered a keep cup ahead of time, good for you. You can pick it up outside. If you didn't order a keep cup ahead of time, no worries. You can purchase one outside. During the reception, you can use your hold-a-plate and your keep cup. And let me just demonstrate this for you because it took me a while to figure out. But here we have the hold-a-plate. You stick your finger on there. And then you can eat and drink at the same time. Yeah, right? So you can also pick up your hold-a-plate outside. Those are just another plug for the app. Also, if you haven't downloaded the app, all of the information is on the app. And in addition to the schedule, presenter bios, we've also just released our annual report for this year. You probably got an email about that last night. You can follow the link in the app to read our Menus of Change annual reports. We're also going to be posting recipes from all of the receptions and the meals. Those will get posted to the website after this conference. But if you're in a breakout session that has a culinary demo, or you're watching a presentation during the conference and want to follow along with the presentation, those are already posted to the app. So you just go to the session in the app, pull it up, and you'll be able to see the presentations. And then finally, with that, tomorrow breakfast starts at 7:30 a.m. downstairs, and then we'll be back here in this theater starting at 8:15. So with that, I release you to go find your keep cup and your hold-a-plate and grab yourself some wine. Thank you.
This is a recipe for beef tartare with a quick cured egg, a modern take on an old classic. Combine the fish sauce, Worcestershire sauce, oyster sauce, honey, hot sauce, garlic cloves, and ground mustard. Gently place the yolks in the marinade. Cover and marinate in the refrigerator for 12 to 24 hours. These beets have been roasted, peeled, and diced. Combine the beets, with the mayonnaise, Tabasco sauce, cornichons, capers, and scallions, and toss gently to combine. Season to taste and hold refrigerated. Add a small amount of oil to a cast iron pan. Cut the peeled shallots in half and sear, flat side down, until they begin to caramelize. Set aside. To plate, use a round cutter to form the beet tartare. Place an egg yolk in the middle. Garnish with bruleed shallots, radishes, asparagus spears, dill tops, and microgreens. Finish with dots of Hellmann's Real Mayonnaise. Here's our beet tartare with quick cured egg. Enjoy!
Here's a great way to put produce at the center of the plate in the middle of winter. Watermelon is available year-round, and because it's a member of the gourd family, it lends itself very well to pairing with other winter vegetables. In this recipe, I'm going to use the watermelon rind and pair it with some global flavors and some spice. This is a watermelon rind massaman curry with winter vegetables. To start the curry, heat the oil in a saucepan over moderate heat. Then add the garlic and the shallots and stir until it's fragrant. Add the curry paste and the chili paste or the chili flakes and stir it for about 10 seconds. Remove half a cup of the top of the creamy layer of the coconut milk and add that to the pan. Stir and cook until the paste is bubbly and the oil begins to separate. Add the remaining coconut milk, soy sauce, onions, and watermelon rind. Reduce the heat and simmer until the onions and the watermelon rind are soft. Add the remaining vegetables in the water and cook for another 4 to 5 minutes. Adjust the seasoning with fish sauce, sugar, and lime juice. Next, add the kaffir lime leaves and the basil and serve immediately over jasmine rice. This easy dish is full of warm Indian spices that will be sure to have you enjoying watermelon all year long.
This dish is a fun take on a classic gratiné, hollandaise crusted cauliflower, seasoned with cheese and mustards. Cut the cauliflower into florets, then toss the florets in a mixing bowl with oil, hot sauce, thyme, garlic, salt, and pepper. Place on a sheet pan lined with parchment paper and roast at a 425-degree oven until the florets begin to turn golden brown, about 15 to 20 minutes. Remove and set aside. Meanwhile, combine the panko, parsley, lemon zest, and cheeses, then season with the salt and pepper. Combine the Knorr liquid hollandaise sauce with the grainy and Dijon mustards. Place the roasted cauliflower in a preheated cast iron pan, top with the hollandaise sauce, and sprinkle with the breadcrumb mixture. Roast for another 10 minutes or until the breadcrumbs are golden brown. Here is the finished dish. Enjoy.
If you find yourself throwing away watermelon rind, please don't. I'm going to show you how to candy it, and this is a recipe that you can make throughout the year since watermelon is available year-round. I'm going to cut the watermelon rind by removing the green peel and all of the flesh from the inside, then cut it into 3-inch by 1/4-inch pieces. I mix the salt with the water and I soak the rind overnight at room temperature. Drain the rind, rinse it well, and then cook it in fresh water until it's tender, which should take about 5 minutes. Drain it and set aside. Next, I'm going to put the vinegar and the spices and sugar into a pot and boil it for 5 minutes. I'll add the rind and then boil this until the rind is clear. I remove it from the heat and let it stand at room temperature until it's cool. After I drain the rind, I'm going to place it onto a sugar-coated pan and cover it with more sugar. Let this set out for a day at room temperature uncovered. The next day, shake off all the excess sugar and store it in an airtight container for up to 2 weeks. You can use the candied watermelon rind as a garnish for cocktails and drinks. You can dip it into chocolate for a sweet, sour, and salty snack, or you can use it as a garnish for cakes, tarts, cupcakes, and cookies.
This is a light, refreshing dish featuring sustainable seafood, Alaskan black cod with a grapefruit relish and an avocado cream. In a bowl, whisk together the grapefruit juice, soy sauce, mirin, miso paste, and black pepper. Marinate the cod fillets for up to 30 minutes. For the relish, char the jalapeno over an open flame. Once cooled, seed and mince. Combine with the diced grapefruit segments, scallions, sugar, red wine vinegar, and olive oil. Season to taste and refrigerate until ready to use. To make the avocado cream, combine the avocado, garlic, yogurt, Hellmann's light mayonnaise, chili, and lime juice in a blender. Blend until smooth. Heat oil in a non-stick sauté pan over medium heat. Pan-sear the cod until opaque and beginning to caramelize. To serve, place the avocado cream on the bottom of the plate. Top with the fish and the grapefruit relish. Garnish with microgreens. Here's our finished dish. I hope you enjoy.
Here's a recipe that's sure to impress your guests. I've used 2 types of watermelon in this recipe, both red and yellow. Yellow watermelon tends to be a little bit sweeter than red watermelon and creates a beautiful color contrast. I've also used watermelon juice to create an interesting dressing. You can make this recipe a day ahead. So let's make our watermelon and avocado mosaic with Dungeness crab salad. Place the watermelon into a blender and blend until smooth. Let this juice sit refrigerated for 1 to 2 hours until the solids have settled to the bottom. You want to decant the clear liquid from the top, leaving the solids behind. Next, you'll want to take the decanted watermelon juice, the gelatin, the lemon juice, and the salt, and bring this to a simmer until the gelatin is melted. You may want to skim as necessary. Next, we'll make the mosaic. Place a piece of plastic wrap at the bottom of a mold. You may use some spray or some water to hold the plastic in place. I'm going to alternate pieces of the red and yellow watermelon along with the avocado inside the mold, leaving a little bit of space in between each piece. Next, I'm going to pour the gelatin over the mold, making sure to barely cover the watermelon and the avocado. Place this into the refrigerator to chill and let it set for an hour. To make the crab salad, gently squeeze the crab meat to remove any excess moisture that might remain. Place the crab meat, the lemon zest, the mayonnaise, creme fraiche, and chives into a mixing bowl and gently toss this together until combined. To plate the salad, remove the mosaic from the refrigerator and then remove it from the mold and place it on your serving dish. If desired, heat a spoon or the edge of a knife and smooth the edges of the mosaic. To finish the dish, I'm going to place the crab salad on top of the mosaic and garnish with microgreens. I hope you'll find this watermelon and avocado mosaic with Dungeness crab salad visually appealing and fun to make.
Here is a dish with spiralized sweet potatoes, clams, and a creamy Asian turmeric sauce. Using a spiralizer, spiralize the sweet potatoes into long, thick noodles. Cook the sweet potatoes in boiling water, stirring gently for about a minute or 2, drain and set aside. Heat the vegetable oil in a wok over medium-low heat, add the sweet potato noodles, stir frequently and cook just until tender. Remove from the wok and set aside. In the same wok, add a little oil, add the clams, turn the heat to medium, add the garlic, ginger, and chopped chili pepper. Add coconut milk and or professional liquid concentrate base. Add turmeric and fresh lime juice. Cook until the clams are open, remove, and then set aside. Reduce the broth until it's thick enough to coat a spoon, and season to taste. Add the noodles back into the sauce, toss gently, and then add the clams to combine well. Place the noodles and the clams on a plate, sprinkle with furikake, cilantro, and sprouts. Garnish with lime. So here is the finished dish. Enjoy.
If you find yourself with an excess of watermelon, turn it into juice. People are rediscovering fermented beverages these days, and here's a delicious recipe for making a watermelon shrub. Heat the sugar and vinegar on the stove, stirring constantly until the sugar is dissolved. Add the watermelon and simmer to release its juices and flavors into the syrup. Cool the mixture and strain out any solids. Add water to taste. Place the mixture into a glass jar and allow it to rest in the refrigerator for 4 days covered. This can be blended with alcohol or other flavors of your choosing to make a delicious beverage. So here's our watermelon shrub. I've garnished it with a watermelon wedge and candied watermelon rind.